I stood there on my front porch, the coffee mug a small warmth against my chilled hands, my gaze fixed upon the vibrant patch of earth I had painstakingly coaxed into existence. This garden, my sanctuary, had blossomed over the past few years, a testament to resilience in the aftermath of my life's undoing. Clarissa, the very name still carried a phantom sting. Our divorce had been a brutal, drawn-out war of attrition, years of biting arguments, a deluge of tears, and finally her departure, taking half my world in her cursed suitcase. Yet here, in this placid Illinois suburb, I had discovered a fragile peace. Just me and my blossoms, roses, tulips, daisies, each one thriving under my dedicated care, safeguarded by a humble fence I had built with my own hands. It wasn't grand, but it was profoundly, unequivocally mine. That quietude shattered the moment I saw the hulking, moving truck, 3 houses down. Initially, I dismissed it, envisioning pleasant new neighbors seeking the same tranquil existence I cherished. Then she emerged from the passenger side, a familiar, infuriating toss of her hair, that self-important gesture she always employed. Clarissa, my ex-wife. A cold dread coiled in my stomach. She had invaded my cul-de-sac, a cruel jest flung by a malicious universe. Then came him, Rick. I hadn't yet learned his name, but I watched him unfold from the driver's seat. A formidable man, broad-shouldered with a brutal buzz cut, the kind who seemed destined to bark orders. His truck, an oversized chrome monstrosity, roared with an obnoxious arrogance, the sort of vehicle chosen by one who demanded all eyes upon him. I observed their unpacking, clinging to a desperate hope that they would remain cloistered within their new domain. But hope, I've learned, is a fleeting illusion when confronted by harsh reality. Days later, as I meticulously watered my roses, that monstrous engine ignited. I looked up just in time to witness Rick's grotesque maneuver, a violent peel-out from his driveway, a sharp cut across the corner, and then the sickening sight of his tires grinding over the pristine edge of my lawn. Deep, ugly ruts marred the verdant carpet I had painstakingly cultivated for months. I stood there, motionless, the hose dripping from my hand, my jaw locked tight. It wasn't the garden itself, not yet, but it felt like a chilling harbinger. The desecration recurred the following week, and the week after that. Each time he'd swing that leviathan wide, leaving tire marks like fresh wounds upon my property. I clenched my teeth, silently reasoning that it wasn't worth a confrontation. Then one fateful Saturday morning, as I knelt in the fertile earth, gently placing new marigolds, the ominous rumble shook the very ground beneath me. Before I could even rise, Rick's truck hurtled, without a shred of hesitation, straight through my burgeoning garden. The front tires obliterated my roses, the rear ones flattened the delicate tulips. Petals, once vibrant, scattered like confetti of sorrow. Stems snapped like brittle bones. I sprang to my feet, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, my fists clenched into white-knuckled knots. The truck didn't even slow. It just kept moving, windows down, the driver's laughter echoing, a mocking peal, as if this brutal act were some grand, exhilarating sport. I turned my gaze to their house, and there she was, Clarissa, poised on their porch, a glass in her hand, a familiar, triumphant smirk twisting her lips, the same look she'd worn when she knew she had won an argument. I couldn't endure it any longer. Dirt still clinging to my knees, I marched across the street, halting abruptly at the edge of their driveway. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice a raw tremor of suppressed fury. Rick emerged from his truck, radiating smug swagger, casually wiping his hands on his jeans as if he'd just completed some noble task. Clarissa remained stationary, observing me with that same infuriating, superior gaze. "You mind keeping your truck off my property?" I managed, striving for a semblance of civility. Rick merely grinned, revealing an unsettling expanse of teeth. "What's the big deal, man? It's just some flowers." My blood began to simmer. "It's my garden. I've been working on it for years. You don't get to roll through it like it's nothing." He unleashed a loud, braying laugh, casting a glance at Clarissa as if I were a particularly amusing jester. Finally she spoke, her voice laced with that old familiar venom. "Oh, Marcus, lighten up. Men will be men. Rick's a real man, not like some people. I stood there staring at her, feeling the familiar agonizing sting. A real man. She had weaponized that phrase during our divorce, too, implying I was somehow less because I didn't stomp around, breaking things to prove a point. Rick clapped a dismissive hand on his truck, still chuckling. Maybe you should get a tougher hobby, buddy. Flowers. That's cute. I said nothing more. I simply turned and walked back toward my house, my jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Their laughter, sharp and cutting, followed me, piercing deeper than I cared to admit. Once inside, I slammed the door, leaning against it, breathing heavily. My garden, what little remained of it, was a desolate ruin. Crushed petals, snapped stems, tire tracks slicing through it like gaping wounds. Years I had poured into cultivating that small measure of peace, and in a single morning they had irrevocably torn it asunder. I looked out the window at their house, at that obnoxious truck parked as if it owned the very street, and something within me shifted, hardened. This wasn't merely about flowers anymore. This was profoundly personal. They wanted to provoke me? Very well, I would push back. Not with yelling or fists, for I was not Rick. I would do it my way. I didn't yet possess the how, but standing amidst the wreckage of my shattered sanctuary, one truth resonated with crystalline clarity. This was far from over, not by a long shot. Every Saturday thereafter, a cold knot of dread tightened in my gut, anticipating the inevitable roar of Rick's truck. It became a hateful ritual. Me sipping coffee on the porch, feigning normalcy while my gaze darted relentlessly to their house, 3 doors down. And with the relentless precision of a clockwork nightmare, I'd hear that engine rev, loud, obnoxious, unmistakable. There he'd go, peeling out of their driveway, swinging wide and tearing once more through my yard. The initial assaults had been confined to the grass, but now he had grown bolder, aiming directly for the garden itself, his tires chewing through the remnants of my flowers, leaving behind a churned wake of mud and broken stems. I'd stand there, gripping my mug so tightly I feared it might shatter, watching him roar off down the street as if he lorded over the entire damn neighborhood. And Clarissa, always Clarissa, perched on their porch, a drink in her hand, observing the spectacle as if it were her favorite television program. Sometimes she'd even wave, that small, infuriating smirk plastered on her face, daring me to retaliate. I even tried speaking to them again. Foolish, I know, but a sliver of hope lingered that I could appeal to their reason. One afternoon, after he had flattened my daisies, I walked over, my hands jammed deep into my pockets, a futile attempt to prevent myself from doing something utterly foolish, like striking him. Rick was leaning against his truck, meticulously polishing the hood as if it were a prize steed. Clarissa sat on their steps, swirling ice in her glass. "Hey," I began, striving for an even tone. "I'm asking you again. Keep that thing off my yard. It's not a racetrack." Rick didn't even acknowledge me, continuing his relentless polishing. "It's just a little fun, man. Relax." Fun. That word struck me like a physical blow. "It's not fun for me," I retorted, my voice tightening. "That garden's mine. I put years into it. You're wrecking it for no reason." He finally straightened, towering over me, that infuriatingly smug grin plastered across his face. "It's just dirt and petals, Marcus. Maybe if you had something worth protecting, I'd care." I felt my face flush with indignation, but before I could retort, Clarissa's voice, sickly sweet, cut in. "He's asserting his manhood," she declared, as if stating the most obvious truth in the world. "You wouldn't get it." Asserting his manhood? I wanted to laugh, but only a cold, surging rage welled within me. I walked away again that day, their laughter like a pack of hounds nipping at my heels all the way back to my house. Every time I attempted to stand up for myself, they transformed it into a twisted joke. I patched up the garden as best I could, replanting what little I could salvage, smoothing out the egregious ruts. But it was never the same. The once neat rows were gone, the fence now leaned precariously, and every repair felt like a desperate bandage on a mortally wounded limb. I started to avoid my own front yard, simply to spare myself the sight of the escalating damage, but I couldn't escape the sound. Every weekend, that truck. Every weekend, their mocking voices. Rick even began shouting taunts as he drove by. "Nice weeds, buddy," or "Grow up, F, lower boy." And Clarissa would cackle as if it were the most uproarious thing she had ever heard. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every humiliating encounter. It wasn't just the garden anymore. It was the way they regarded me, as if I were nothing, as if I had always been nothing to her. Then came the morning that irrevocably shattered me. I had toiled late the night before, pouring my remaining energy into a new section of the garden, striving to breathe life back into its ravaged form. I had rebuilt the wooden fence by hand, hammering each plank into place, feeling a flicker of pride ignite within me. I finally succumbed to exhaustion, sinking into bed, tired but buoyed by a nascent hope. When I awoke, I shuffled outside with my coffee, expecting to behold my work still standing. Instead, I froze. The garden was gone. Not merely damaged, destroyed. Every plant uprooted, stomped flat, or savagely torn out. The fence, on which I had spent hours, was brutally kicked in, splintered wood scattered everywhere. Deep, ugly tire tracks carved a monstrous path through the very heart of it, and the acrid smell of exhaust still hung heavy in the air. It looked like a desolate war zone, as if some monstrous beast had ripped through it solely to spite me. My mug slipped from my trembling hand, coffee splashing onto my boots, but I remained motionless, my chest constricted, my hands trembling uncontrollably. I didn't need to guess the perpetrator. I could hear Rick's truck idling down the street, and when I looked up, there he was, leaning out the window, that same infuriatingly stupid grin plastered on his face. "Oops!" he called out, then gunned the engine and sped off. Clarissa was on their porch again, laughing so hard she nearly spilled her drink. I didn't move for a long time. I just stared at the abomination before me, my mess now. The last thing I had, the one anchor I had clung to after she left me, was utterly, irrevocably gone. It wasn't just dirt and petals to me. It was every quiet morning I had spent out there, every hour I had poured into creating something good from the wreckage she had left behind. And they had taken it, simply because they could. I walked back inside, slammed the door, and sank into a chair, my mind a tempest of furious thoughts. I would not beg them anymore. I would not yell or reason or play their twisted game. They believed they could walk all over me, literally, and escape consequence. They believed I would simply endure it, as I always had with her. But not this time. I didn't yet know my path. But as I sat there staring at my muddy boots, a cold, unyielding fire began to burn within me. This wasn't about flowers anymore. This was about their arrogant assumption that they could break me and then laugh at my ruin. I was not broken, not yet, and I would not let them win. I would find a way to make them regret this. I would ensure it. Sleep offered no respite that night. The obliterated garden haunted my closed eyes. The smashed flowers, the shattered fence, the tire tracks slicing through it all like a vicious knife. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of anger and something sharper, something more insidious. I wasn't just going to fix it this time. I wasn't going to let Rick and Clarissa continue to mock me, to treat me like some pliable doormat they could stomp on whenever the impulse struck. By the time the sun timidly touched the horizon, my resolve was hardened. I needed a plan, something cunning, something that would strike them where it truly wounded, without me ever having to throw a single punch. I didn't possess Rick's brute size nor Clarissa's honed venom, but I had my intellect, and I was going to wield it. I seized my phone, scrolling through my contacts until Kel Benton's name materialized. If anyone could help me execute this, it was him. Kel, an old friend from the simpler days before Clarissa, before the divorce, now lived a rustic life, a farmer with an undeniable genius for tinkering. Over the years, he'd concocted all sorts of peculiar inventions, contraptions for his crops, ingenious gadgets to deter crows, even a small, quirky robot dog just for a laugh. We hadn't spoken in a while, but he owed me a favor from a few summers ago, when I'd helped him haul hay after his truck had broken down. I dialed his number, pacing my kitchen, the wrecked garden a silent, accusing witness through the window. "Marcus Shaw, you old dog." Kel's voice, rough and cheerful, boomed through the receiver. "What's got you calling me at the crack of dawn?" I wasted no time on pleasantries. "I need your help, Cal. My ex-wife's new husband's been tearing up my yard, and I'm done taking it. I want to set something up, something to stop him cold." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Sounds like a man's crossed the line. Tell me what you're thinking." I laid it all out. Rick's relentless incursions into my garden, Clarissa's malicious encouragement, their utter demolition of everything I had built. Kel listened, grunting occasionally, and when I finished, he didn't hesitate. "I've got just the thing," he declared. "You ever hear of a perimeter mat? Farmers use them to keep cows from wandering. Low voltage. Won't kill anybody, but it'll make them wish they'd stayed home. I've got one I can tweak for you." My ears perked up. "What else you got?" He laughed again. "How about motion sprinklers? Freezing cold water hits them the second they step where they shouldn't. And oh, you'll love this, a motion speaker. I rigged one up with a sound that'll scare the devil himself. Part demon, part hellhound, loud as sin. They'll think the gates of hell just opened up." I felt a grin, a genuinely dark one, spread across my face. "That's perfect, Cal. Can you get it to me quick?" "Give me a day to round it up," he said. "I'll drop it off tomorrow. You owe me a beer after this, though." "Deal," I exclaimed, already feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Kel arrived the next afternoon, his beat-up truck rattling its way into my driveway. He climbed out, wiry and sun-baked, hauling a box of gear that clinked and rattled with ominous purpose. "Here's your revenge kit," he announced, setting it down with a decisive thud. He walked me through its components. The mat was a thin, rubbery strip, easily buried beneath a layer of dirt, wired to a small battery pack. The sprinklers were deceptively small but robust, perfect for concealment within the flower beds, aimed precisely at Rick's usual path. The speaker, he hooked it up to his phone and played the sound for me. It was a deep guttural roar, like something torn from a nightmare, loud enough to awaken the entire street. "They'll crap their pants," Kel said, grinning. I nodded, picturing Rick's smug face contorting into pure panic. "Let's hope so." We spent the rest of the day meticulously setting up the elaborate trap. I dug shallow trenches along the edge of my yard, laid the mat down, and carefully covered it with soil, rendering it invisible. The sprinklers went in next, tucked discreetly behind what remained of my plants, aimed directly at Rick's usual trajectory. The speaker, I hid it beneath the porch, angled so its terrifying sound would blast out toward the street. Kel wired it all to motion sensors. Step on the mat and the entire production would erupt. I added one more crucial element, my old security cameras. I had bought them cheaply a while back, mostly to deter package thieves, but now they would be my unwavering eyes. I mounted one on the porch, another by the garage, both precisely aimed at the yard. If Rick tried anything, I would have irrefutable proof. By the time we finished, the sun was sinking and my little house from a distance appeared perfectly normal again. Except now it was a finely tuned trap, poised to spring. Kel clapped me on the shoulder. "You're a patient man, Marcus, but even patient men have limits. This will teach him." I thanked him, handed him a cold beer from the fridge, and sent him on his way. Then I retreated inside, poured myself a fresh mug of coffee, and settled into a chair by the window. The night was dark, the street quiet, but I wouldn't be sleeping. I wanted to be wide awake when Rick made his next move. I knew he would come. Weekends were his perverse stage, and he wouldn't be able to resist tearing through my yard again, especially after his recent comprehensive demolition. I sat there, sipping my coffee, its bitterness mirroring the simmering fire in my chest. Every subtle creak of the house, every rustle outside had me on edge. I kept visualizing it, his truck rolling up, the tires hitting the mat, the glorious chaos that would undoubtedly follow. I wasn't a violent man, never had been, but this wasn't about violence. This was about reclaiming what was mine, about shattering their illusion that I was the weak, insignificant man they so readily perceived. My garden was gone, certainly, but my pride remained. I glanced at the cameras on my phone, their tiny green lights blinking reassuringly in the dark. Everything was ready. All I had to do was wait. And as the night stretched on, that wait transformed into something deeply satisfying, like the serene calm before an inevitable storm. They had pushed me too far. Now they were about to discover the furious consequences of pushing back. I had been by the window for what felt like an eternity, my coffee long since grown cold, when I finally saw them. Headlights, twin beacons slicing through the oppressive dark. It was 2 a.m. The street was utterly silent save for the low, predatory growl of Rick's truck creeping closer. My heart began to pound, not from fear, but from something far more potent. Anticipation, perhaps even a flicker of savage excitement. All day, with Kel's expert assistance, I had meticulously prepared my snare. Now the moment of truth had arrived. I leaned forward, peering through the blinds, watching that oversized, arrogant beast of a vehicle inch its way down the cul-de-sac. Rick didn't even attempt subtlety. He swung wide just as he always did, aiming straight for my vulnerable yard. I held my breath as the front tires crossed the invisible line, hitting the precise spot where I had buried the mat. Then it happened. Zap! A sharp, unmistakable crackle tore through the night, faint yet undeniably present, and the truck lurched violently as if it had slammed into an invisible wall. Rick's voice, a high-pitched yelp completely at odds with his self-proclaimed big man swagger, sliced through the quiet. Before he could even begin to process what had transpired, the sprinklers erupted. I had aimed them perfectly, and now they unleashed a torrent of freezing water directly at his truck, blasting through the open windows. I could hear his curses, loud and frantic, as the icy deluge assaulted him. The demon roar came next. Kel's speaker unleashed that ungodly sound, a deep guttural howl that echoed off the neighboring houses as if some monstrosity had clawed its way straight out of hell. It was even louder than I had anticipated, rattling my very windows, and I watched, captivated as Rick's truck swerved erratically, tires spinning wildly in the now sodden dirt. He was bellowing something I couldn't discern, undoubtedly a string of furious obscenities, and I couldn't help it. I grinned. The chaos was a magnificent symphony. Mud flew everywhere as he frantically attempted to peel out, the truck fishtailing like a panicked, trapped animal. Then I saw movement at their house. Clarissa. She stumbled out onto their porch, clad in a robe, her hair a disheveled mess. She must have heard the unholy cacophony and instinctively assumed Rick needed her intervention. She took 2 steps off the porch, barefoot, and directly encountered the mat herself. Zap! She shrieked, a wild, piercing sound, hopping around frantically as if she had stepped on a live wire. Rick, what the hell is this? She hollered, her voice cracking as the sprinklers found their new target, drenching her from head to toe. I couldn't remain cloistered inside a moment longer. I grabbed my jacket, slipped on my boots, and stepped out onto the porch, my face carefully composed, as if I had merely woken up to investigate the commotion. The scene unfolding before me was infinitely more satisfying than any dream. Rick was half out of his truck, one leg mired in the clinging mud, water dripping from his buzzed head, his shirt plastered to his broad chest. Clarissa was a sodden, shivering mess, clutching her robe, glaring at everything and everyone as if the entire world had personally betrayed her. The demonic roar had ceased, the speaker on a timer, but the sprinklers continued their relentless assault, spitting icy water in relentless bursts. I crossed my arms and leaned against the railing, allowing the silence to settle for a pregnant moment before I spoke. Problems? I asked, my voice calm, even, like a genuinely concerned neighbor. Rick whipped his head around, his face a mask of furious crimson, but he offered no immediate reply, too engrossed in the futile struggle to extricate his boot from the sucking mud. Clarissa, however, didn't miss a beat. She stormed toward me, slipping precariously on the wet grass, a dripping finger wagging accusingly in my face. What did you do, Marcus? This is insane. We're calling the police. I didn't flinch. I had anticipated that very threat, and I was entirely prepared. "Please do," I said, meeting her enraged gaze. "I've got security footage of you two destroying my property for weeks. The cops might find that rather interesting." That stopped her cold. Her mouth opened, then snapped shut, and I could practically see the frantic gears turning behind those angry eyes. Rick finally freed himself from the mud and stomped over, his fists balled, clearly contemplating a swing. "You think you're smart, huh?" he growled, water still trickling down his neck. "Setting up some little booby trap? You're pathetic." I shrugged, not moving an inch. "I think it's pretty smart, actually. You should try staying on your own side of the street next time." He took a step closer, his chest puffed out, but Clarissa grabbed his arm. "Rick, don't!" she hissed, her voice low but sharp. "He's not worth it." She was soaked, her robe clinging to her, and for once her smug facade had utterly crumbled. They stood there glaring at me, and I simply stared back, feeling something I hadn't felt in an agonizingly long time: control. The cameras were rolling, the trap had worked, and for the first time since their hateful arrival, I wasn't the one on the defensive. Rick muttered something under his breath, undoubtedly a curse, and turned back to his truck, kicking at the mud as if it had personally offended him. Clarissa shot me one last venomous look before following him, her slippers squishing with every step. "This isn't over," she called over her shoulder, but the threat sounded hollow, as if she wasn't quite so certain anymore. I watched them go, the truck limping back to their driveway, leaving behind a pathetic trail of water and undeniable defeat. I remained on the porch a while longer, letting the cool night air wash over me, the sprinklers finally clicking off behind me. The yard was a mess again, mud and fresh tire marks, but it no longer mattered. Tonight, this wasn't about the garden. This was about demonstrating, unequivocally, that I would no longer be rolled over. I returned inside, locked the door, and pulled up the camera footage on my phone. There it was, clear as day. Rick driving in, the mat zapping him, the sprinklers drenching him. Clarissa's comical dance when she too hit the trap. I saved every precious second of it. Then I leaned back in my chair. They could call the cops if they wanted. I would relish watching them try to explain this. For now, though, I had won. Not the entire war, perhaps, but this battle. This one was unequivocally mine. I set the phone down, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and sat there in the quiet, savoring the taste. The night wasn't over yet, and neither was this fight, but for the first time in weeks I felt as if I held all the cards. Let them come at me again. I would be ready. The following morning I awoke feeling lighter than I had in weeks, the memory of Rick and Clarissa flailing in my trap still vivid and satisfying. I had slept deeply, the kind of profound sleep that comes from landing a decisive blow, even if it wasn't delivered with fists. The sun was just beginning to creep over the rooftops as I stepped onto the porch with my coffee, expecting to survey the muddy aftermath of the previous night. It was there, certainly, tire tracks and puddles, but something else immediately captured my attention. Rick's truck was parked crookedly in their driveway, still streaked with dirt, and through their front window I could see him pacing, a caged bear in his own home. Clarissa was nowhere in sight, likely still fuming in her soggy robe. I smirked into my mug. They had threatened to call the police, but the street remained quiet, no sirens, no flashing lights. They had backed off, at least for now. My moment of triumph, however, was fleeting. Around noon, a sleek black sedan, the kind that screamed lawyer or bill collector, glided to a halt in front of my house. A man in a cheap suit emerged, clipboard in hand, and marched up my walkway. I met him at the door before he could even knock. "Marcus Shaw?" he inquired, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "That's me," I said, maintaining an even, easy tone. He handed me a piece of paper, official-looking, emblazoned with a barrage of legal gibberish. "Cease and desist order," he stated bluntly. "From Richard Dalton. Says you're harassing him with dangerous devices on your property. You've got 24 hours to remove them or he's filing charges." I took the paper, my gaze sweeping over the words. Trespass, liability, damages. Rick's name was scrawled at the bottom in a bold, sloppy signature. I almost laughed aloud. "Thanks," I told the man, and he merely nodded, turned, and departed without another word. I shut the door and reread the document, my good mood beginning to curdle. Harassment, dangerous devices, the audacity. Coming from the man who had been treating my yard like his personal demolition derby. I tossed the letter onto the table and grabbed my phone, pulling up the footage from last night. There it was, crystal clear. Rick driving onto my property, the mat zapping him, the sprinklers soaking him, private land, clear trespassing. If anyone had a case, it was unequivocally me. I wasn't taking anything down. Let him try to push this. I would shove it right back in his face. Still, I knew this wasn't the true end. Rick didn't strike me as the type to be deterred by a mere zap and some water, and Clarissa was far too stubborn to grant me the last word. I figured they'd lick their wounds for a day or two, then launch another attack. I was right, but not in the way I expected. It began subtly that evening. I was out front cleaning up the mud from the night before when I noticed something amiss. A couple of ketchup packets were stuck to one of my garden gnomes, the kind you get from fast food joints, smeared crimson across its little hat. I frowned, picked them up, and tossed them into the trash, thinking perhaps some careless child had dropped them. Then, the next morning, I discovered empty beer cans jammed into what little remained of my flower beds, 3 of them crumpled and reeking of stale booze. I stood there, hands on my hips, staring at them. This was no random act by children. Kids didn't sneak around planting cans like that. I checked the cameras. Nothing clear, just shadows moving in the dark, too far off to discern a face. My gut screamed, Rick. He wasn't foolish enough to drive through again, not after last night, but this? This was petty enough to be his handiwork. It escalated over the next few days. One night I returned home from the hardware store to find garbage scattered across my lawn. Banana peels, coffee grounds, crumpled wrappers, as if someone had simply emptied a trash bag and fled. The next morning I stepped outside and recoiled, gagging. Someone had dumped a reeking pile of used cat litter right by my porch steps. The smell hit me like a punch, sour and sharp. I had to grab a shovel to scoop it into a bag before I could even reach my mailbox. I checked the cameras again. Still nothing solid. Just a flicker of movement near the very edge of the front yard. Whoever it was, they knew where the blind spots were, and that made my blood run hot. Rick had been watching, calculating, figuring out how to circumvent my defenses. I could almost picture him snickering about it, Clarissa egging him on with that infuriating smirk, convinced they had discovered a new insidious way to get under my skin. I wasn't wrong about them brooding either. Every time I saw Rick outside, he would glare at me across the street, his jaw tight, his broad shoulders hunched as if he were physically restraining himself. Clarissa maintained her distance, but I'd sometimes catch her on their porch, staring at my house with those cold, calculating eyes, sipping her drink as if she were meticulously plotting. They weren't yelling anymore, weren't mocking me to my face, but this quiet, insidious revenge was far worse. It was sneaky, dirty, and it made me feel as though my small victory had meant absolutely nothing. I had humiliated them, certainly, but now they were striking back in ways I couldn't prove. I spent hours cleaning up their disgusting messes, scrubbing ketchup off my gnomes, hauling trash to the curb, and each time I did, that bitter fire in my chest flared anew. The cease and desist letters sat on my table, mocking me too. Rick pretending to be the victim while transforming my yard into his personal dumping ground. I sat down that night with another coffee, staring out at the dark street, my mind racing. The trap had worked once, but it wasn't enough. They had found a way around it, and I couldn't simply sit here, passively enduring their torment. I needed to catch them, truly catch them, with something the cameras couldn't miss, something that would stick, something they couldn't wiggle out of. I didn't know how yet, but as I watched their house, lights flickering behind their curtains, one thing resonated with chilling certainty. The worst was still to come. They weren't done with me, and I, by God, was not done with them. This was a game now, and I was going to play it better. I was beginning to feel like a prisoner in my own home, constantly on edge, perpetually waiting for the next pile of garbage or petty jab from Rick and Clarissa. The cat litter had been the definitive tipping point. Shoveling that reeking mess off my porch ignited a searing realization. I couldn't just keep cleaning up after them. I needed absolute, undeniable proof. Something solid to shove in their faces and end this insidious torment once and for all. I had been diligently checking the security cameras every single day, but they were too cunning, too adept at sticking to the shadows, expertly exploiting the blind spots. From the impenetrable shadows, a chilling realization dawned. I had gravely misjudged Rick. He was no mere boorish brute with a truck. He was a viper, cunning and malicious to his very core. One night, coffee clutched in hand, my gaze drifted across the desolate street. Then a phantom flicker at the fringe of my yard. Not a car, but a fleeting form, swift and silent, melting into the inky abyss. My heart hammered. I snatched my phone, pulling up the camera feed, squinting at the grainy apparition. It was him, Rick. Though his face remained shrouded, I recognized that hulking silhouette, the arrogant swagger as if he owned the very ground. I watched him draw nearer, a sinister sack slung over his shoulder, and a cold dread twisted in my gut. This wasn't just another act of petty vandalism. Something far more insidious was at play. I remained utterly still, barely breathing, allowing him to believe I was lost to sleep or long departed. He paused by the ragged remnants of my flower beds, knelt, and began to pour. Not garbage, but a chilling white granularity shimmering malevolently in the moonlight. Salt, an entire insidious bag of it, desecrating my very soil. My fist clenched, knuckles aching. This wasn't just a torment now. He was poisoning the earth itself, ensuring nothing would ever thrive there again. My garden, already a desolate wasteland, was now being defiled, a final spiteful curse upon any hope of resurgence. He worked with a chilling efficiency, spreading the blight thick, then rose, brushed his hands with a triumphant gesture, and vanished back into the night, swallowed by the darkness toward his own dominion. I sat there trembling with a cold, righteous fury, watching his retreat. He believed himself victorious, his transgression unseen. He was wrong. I immediately accessed the camera footage, rewinding to the precise moment of his appearance. There it was, stark and undeniable. The garage camera, an unblinking eye, had captured him in vivid clarity, his face illuminated by a stray streetlight as he hunched over with that accursed sack. Rick Dalton in all his smug villainy, salting my earth like some grotesque caricature. I saved the clip, my hands quivering not with fear, but with the exhilarating thrill of finally having him cornered. This transcended mere mischief. This was calculated, deliberate destruction. Without a moment's hesitation, I seized my phone and dialed the local police. My voice, though my heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs, remained steady. "Yes, hello, this is Marcus Shaw on Elm Street," I declared when the dispatcher answered. "I have video evidence of my neighbor trespassing and ruining my property. He just poured salt all over my yard to kill the soil. I need someone out here now." It wasn't long, perhaps 20 minutes, before a cruiser glided silently to a halt before my house, its lights discreetly off. 2 officers emerged, a younger man with a stark buzz cut and an older woman whose demeanor promised no nonsense. I met them at the door, phone in hand. "Thanks for coming," I stated, keeping my words concise. "I have it all on camera." They followed me inside and I played the damning footage. Rick slinking in, the grim act of dumping the salt, his furtive escape. The older cop's eyebrow arched. "That's pretty blatant," she observed, her pen already scratching in her notebook. "You know who this is?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Rick Dalton, lives 3 houses down. He's been tearing up my yard for weeks with his truck, too. I've got more video if you need it." She nodded. "This will do for now. Let's go have a word with him." I remained on my porch, a silent sentinel, watching them stride down the street, their flashlights dancing in the gloom. Rick's truck sat brazenly in his driveway, and as the officers knocked, a light flickered on within. The door opened, revealing Rick shirtless and disheveled. his annoyance quickly morphing into something akin to panic as he beheld the uniforms. I couldn't discern their words, but his arms began to flail, his voice rising in a desperate attempt to bluster his way out. Then the younger officer stepped forward, calm but unyielding, and Rick's shoulders sagged in defeat. Clarissa appeared behind him, her face ghostly, clutching that wretched robe again. She too began to shriek, her voice slicing through the quiet night. "This is ridiculous. You're ruining our family over some dirt." I simply stood there, arms crossed, letting the tempest wash over me. The officers remained unmoved. They spoke for a few more minutes, then Rick emerged, his hands clasped behind his back. The distinct click of handcuffs echoed, and a small, tight knot of tension in my chest began to unravel. They escorted him to the cruiser, his head bowed in ignominy. Clarissa screamed after them, a banshee's wail tearing through the stillness. The older cop returned to me as her partner secured Rick in the patrol car. "We're taking him in for trespassing and property damage," she announced. "That video is solid. You want to press charges?" "Damn right I do," I responded without a hint of hesitation. She offered a small nod as if she had expected nothing less. "We'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow with the footage. For now, he's spending the night in a cell." I thanked her and they drove off, Rick's defeated silhouette slumped in the back seat. Clarissa stood on her porch watching their departure, then spun to unleash a burning glare in my direction, even from that distance. I offered a subtle shrug, just enough for her to perceive it. "Should have thought of that before you ruined my garden," I called out, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet street. She offered no retort, merely spun back inside and slammed her door with a resounding thud. I retreated indoors, secured my locks, and sank into my chair, the adrenaline still thrumming through my veins. The yard was a lost cause now, salted and despoiled, but in that moment it didn't matter. Tonight I had caught him. I had won this round, and they couldn't simply dismiss it now. I poured myself a fresh coffee, the steam coiling upward, and allowed myself a slow, deliberate smile. It wasn't over. Clarissa's searing gaze had confirmed as much, but for now I held the advantage, and it felt profoundly good. The next morning, the street lay cloaked in a preternatural quiet, a stillness that felt almost too perfect to be real. Rick was gone, dragged away in cuffs the previous night, and I surmised Clarissa was still reeling from the shockwave. I stepped outside with my coffee, anticipating a surge of triumph, but the sight of my yard, the salted earth, the shattered fence, dampened it slightly. I had ensnared him, yes, but the wounds remained. Still, I refused to let that eclipse the moment. I sipped my coffee, my gaze fixed on their house, wondering how long it would take Rick to secure his release. Not long, as it transpired. By noon, his truck rumbled back into their driveway, slower than usual, as if attempting to escape notice. He emerged, head down, and vanished inside without a single glance my way. Clarissa emerged onto the porch a minute later, pacing like a caged beast, her phone pressed to her ear. Her words were lost to the distance, but her wild gesticulations painted a vivid picture of her fury, undoubtedly excoriating a lawyer or a friend about the monumental injustice. The neighborhood began to hum with whispers. Mrs. Henley, the elderly woman next door, peered over her fence at me while tending her plants. "Heard the cops were here last night," she murmured, her voice laced with curiosity, not malice. "Yeah," I replied, keeping it simple. "Caught him wrecking my yard on camera." She nodded, a faint smile gracing her lips. "Good for you, Marcus. That man's been a menace since he showed up." It wasn't just her. Other neighbors offered nods or quick waves, as if I had accomplished what they had been too polite to attempt. It felt good knowing I wasn't fighting this battle alone, but the reprieve was fleeting. That night, around 3 a.m, a sharp crackling sound outside jolted me awake. I stumbled to the window, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and saw it, flames licking upward from my trash can by the curb, a vibrant orange against the impenetrable black. My heart plummeted. I snatched my phone and bolted outside in my boxers and a t-shirt. the biting cold air raising goosebumps on my skin as I yanked the garden hose from the porch. The fire wasn't large, mostly paper and leaves, but the acrid stench of burning plastic assaulted me as I doused it. The can was half melted by the time the flames succumbed, a charred, dripping husk on the pavement. I stood there, the hose still in my hand, breathing heavily, the wet grass soaking my bare feet. This was no accident. Someone had ignited it, and it didn't require a genius to deduce who. My gaze flickered toward their house, dark, silent, devoid of any sign of life. But I knew. Rick might have been licking his wounds, but Clarissa? She was a different breed of madness, the kind that refused to yield. I trudged back inside, soaked and shivering, and pulled up the camera footage. My stomach twisted as I watched a hooded figure, quick and furtive, approach the can, a lighter flickering in their hand. The angle was imperfect, the face obscured, yet I recognized her shape, her movements. Clarissa. She had cleverly kept herself just outside the frame's clarity, evading the camera's precise reach. Smart. Too smart. I sat there, staring at the screen, a slow, relentless anger building within me. She had crossed an unforgivable line. Arson was no prank, no trivial act of vandalism. It was dangerous, and I couldn't allow it to go unpunished. But the footage wasn't enough. Not yet. The police would dismiss it as circumstantial, and she would slither away with that infuriatingly smug grin. I needed more, something unassailable. But how to obtain it? I spent the next day cleaning up the wreckage, hauling the ruined can to the garage, my mind a furious whirlwind of thoughts. Rick remained hidden, likely under strict orders to maintain a low profile after his arrest. But Clarissa was ubiquitous, pacing her porch, her eyes like daggers whenever I ventured outside. The neighbors now kept their distance, whispering amongst themselves, and I could feel the tension tightening its grip on the street. This was far from over. I began to meticulously scrutinize my cameras each night, adjusting their angles, hoping to ensnare her if she dared another attempt. I even re-erected the sprinklers, a silent deterrent should Rick somehow find his courage again. But it was Clarissa who truly haunted my thoughts now. She was unhinged, wilder than I had ever witnessed her, even during the tumultuous divorce. I had humiliated her precious Rick, and she would not, could not let that affront pass. Sleep became a fleeting luxury. Every rustle, every creak sent me to the window, my coffee growing cold as I maintained my vigil, watching, waiting. I was prepared for a protracted war. She would inevitably falter, and I would be there to witness her downfall. Then, from an unexpected quarter, help arrived. It was late afternoon, the sun dipping low, when a soft, insistent tap echoed at my door. I opened it to find Brielle Knox, the teenage girl from 2 houses over, standing there, hands tucked into her pockets. She was a quiet kid, perpetually engrossed with her drone, and our interactions had never extended beyond a perfunctory wave. "Hey, Mr. Shaw," she began, shifting her weight. I saw what happened with your trash can, and I know who did it." I blinked, momentarily stunned. "What do you mean?" She glanced over her shoulder, then back at me. "I've got drone footage. Caught her lighting it. Clarissa. She egged my dog's crate last week, and I've been watching her ever since. I'm done with her crap." My jaw dropped. "You've got video?" She nodded, pulling out her phone. Clear as day. I grinned, a genuine, unburdened smile, wider than any I had worn in weeks. "Brielle, you just became my favorite neighbor." She offered a small smirk, and in that instant, I knew. This was the break I had been praying for. Clarissa was finished. I stood on my porch, still reeling from Brielle's visit, my mind alight with the gift she had just bestowed upon me. She had shown me the drone footage on her phone, grainy at first, then zooming in with crystalline clarity. There was Clarissa stealthily emerging from her house in that telltale hoodie, a lighter flickering in her hand as she bent over my trash can. The flames erupted swiftly and she darted back, a nervous cat glancing around before melting into the shadows. Brielle's drone had captured every damning second, hovering silently above the street. "I figured you'd want this," she had said, her voice sharp with her own simmering resentment. She's been a jerk to everyone, not just you. I had nodded, barely able to speak, and she had sent me the file then and there. Thanks, Brielle, I had managed, and she had merely shrugged as if it were nothing before heading back home, hands in her pockets. But it was everything. I went inside, locked the door, and pulled up the video on my laptop, watching it again and again. My hands were steady now, no longer trembling, replaced by a calm, resolute certainty. This wasn't like the blurry, debatable camera footage of Rick. This was her face, her movements, undeniable. Arson. She had crossed a line from which there was no return, and I had her dead to rights. I burned the video to a USB drive, grabbed my jacket, and headed to the police station that afternoon. The same older cop from Rick's arrest was there, her nameplate reading Officer Grant. She looked up from her desk as I approached, raising an eyebrow. Back already, Mr. Shaw, she quipped, leaning back in her chair. Yeah, I confirmed, holding up the drive. Got something new, Clarissa Dalton this time. She set my trash can on fire the other night, caught it all on video. She took the drive, plugged it into her computer, and watched the footage in silence. I stood there, arms crossed, feeling the immense weight lift from me with each passing second she stared at the screen. When it finished, she let out a low whistle. That's her, all right, she said, scribbling something on a notepad. Where'd you get this? Neighbor kid with a drone, I replied. She's got her own beef with Clarissa. Lucky for me. Grant nodded, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. Lucky indeed. This is solid. We'll pick her up today. A wave of relief washed over me as if I could finally truly breathe. Thanks, I said, and she waved me off. Just doing the job. You pressing charges on this one too? You bet, I answered without a moment's hesitation. She gave me a look, half respect, half amusement, and told me to head home. They'd handle it. I was back on my porch by late afternoon, coffee in hand, when the cruiser rolled up to their house. I watched from a distance, feigning casualness, as if merely enjoying the day. 2 officers, Grant and the younger guy from before, knocked on the door. Clarissa answered, still in that dreadful robe, her hair a disheveled mess. I couldn't distinguish their words, but her arms began to flail, her voice rising, sharp and piercing. This is insane. You can't do this, she shrieked, loud enough for me to hear. Grant remained composed, uttering something I couldn't discern, and then the younger cop stepped forward, cuffs in hand. Clarissa froze, her mouth agape, then attempted to retreat inside. They didn't permit it. Grant took her arm, gentle but firm, and turned her around. The cuffs clicked and she began to scream again, a string of curses and desperate pleas echoing down the street. Rick came barreling out then, his face inflamed, fists clenched. What the hell's going on? He roared, storming toward the officers. I tensed, anticipating a brawl, but the younger officer moved swiftly, blocking Rick's path. Step back, sir, he stated, his voice hard. Rick ignored him, swinging an arm, not at the cop, but toward me, pointing across the street. This is you, isn't it, you little bastard? He bellowed. I didn't stir, merely sipped my coffee, meeting his furious glare. The cop seized him, twisting his arm back, and Rick stumbled, cursing, as they held him in place. Clarissa continued her banshee shriek, her voice now cracking with desperation as they escorted her to the cruiser. He's lying! It's all lies! She cried, but it sounded fragile, defeated. The neighbors were now emerging, Mrs. Henley on her lawn, a few others peeking through windows, and I could feel their collective gaze on me, on them. Grant shoved Clarissa into the back seat, slamming the door, while the younger cop kept Rick pinned until his thrashing subsided. Stay here, he instructed Rick, then joined Grant in the car. They drove off, Clarissa's muffled yells fading into the distance, leaving Rick standing there, panting, staring at me as if his eyes could ignite my house. I set my mug down and walked to the edge of my porch, hands in my pockets. Rick took a step toward me, his fist clenching again, but he stopped abruptly, perhaps remembering the recent presence of law enforcement. You're dead for this, he snarled, low and vicious. Maybe, I said, shrugging. But she lit the fire, not me. You should have kept her on a leash. His face contorted, and for a second I thought he might charge anyway, but he merely spat on the ground and stormed back inside, slamming his door so violently the windows rattled. I stood there a minute longer, the street quiet once more, the full weight of it all settling in. Clarissa was gone, arrested, locked up, and Rick was trapped, helpless for once. I had done it. Not just a scare or a mild inconvenience, but a strike where it truly wounded them. I retreated inside, locked up, and sank into my chair, the adrenaline ebbing into a calmer sensation. The garden remained a wreck, the trash can a melted lump, but none of that mattered now. I had reclaimed control piece by painstaking piece, and they couldn't simply laugh it off anymore. The fight wasn't over. Rick's lingering glare had confirmed as much. But tonight I had won, and that was enough. The next morning the street felt different, quieter, heavier, as if the very air held its breath. Clarissa was gone, imprisoned on arson charges, and Rick was left to nurse his wounds. I stepped outside with my coffee, expecting a surge of triumph, but it was bittersweet. The salted soil stared back at me, a gaping wound where my garden had once bloomed, and I couldn't shake the oppressive weight of it all. I had won a battle, yes, but the war had left scars that I could not ignore. I sipped my coffee, my gaze fixed on their house, the curtains tightly drawn, no sign of life within. Rick's truck sat in the driveway, still streaked with the mud from that night I had zapped him, and I wondered how long he would remain silent. Not long, I surmised. He wasn't the type to let this go, not with Clarissa behind bars because of me. The neighborhood had shifted as well. Mrs. Henley waved at me from her yard, a warmth in her greeting that hadn't been there before, and I caught a few other neighbors glancing my way, some with nods, others with quick averted gazes. Word had spread like wildfire. Rick's arrest, Clarissa's spectacular meltdown, the entire sordid saga. I wasn't certain if they viewed me as a hero or simply the catalyst of chaos, but it no longer mattered. They weren't glaring at me as if I were the problem, and that at least was something. I spent the day occupied, cleaning up the last of the trash can's remains, fine-tuning the cameras just in case, but my mind kept drifting back to Clarissa in that cell, and Rick stewing across the street. She would be out eventually, on bail or probation, and then what? I was not naive enough to believe this was the final act. Weeks stretched into a slow, taut expanse. Clarissa returned one afternoon, a cab depositing her in front of their house. I watched from my window as she emerged, her face hard and cold. No robe this time, only jeans and a jacket, her hair pulled back tightly. She did not look my way, simply marched inside, and the door slammed shut behind her. Rick emerged a minute later, head down, and I observed the sheriff's deputy parked nearby, likely enforcing the restraining order I had filed after the fire. He could not legally approach my property now, and that offered a sliver of breathing room. But the silence emanating from their house was not peace. It was the ominous calm before a storm, and I could feel it in my very bones. They did not venture out much after that. No porch drinks, no raucous truck revving, just a cold, bitter quiet that hung over the cul-de-sac like an oppressive fog. Then, one night, the dam broke. I was out front collecting the mail under the stark streetlights when I heard heavy, deliberate footsteps. I turned, and there was Rick, stomping across the street, his face twisted with something dark and menacing. My stomach tightened, but I held my ground, hands in my pockets, maintaining a veneer of casualness. He stopped a few feet away, just beyond the boundary set by the restraining order, his fists clenched so tightly I could see the veins throbbing. "You happy now?" he growled, his voice low and raw. "You destroyed us, you smug little prick." I looked at him, his buzzed hair gleaming under the harsh light, his eyes wild, and I felt a flicker of something, perhaps pity, but not enough to soften my resolve. "I didn't destroy anything," I stated, keeping my tone even. "You two did that yourselves. Driving through my yard, salting my garden, setting fires. That's on you." He took a step closer, testing the line, and I tensed, ready to dial the police if he crossed it. "You think you're so smart," he spat. putting her in jail, ruining everything. We're the laughing stock of this damn street because of you. I shrugged, never taking my eyes off him. Maybe you should have thought about that before you trashed my life. I didn't start this, Rick. He opened his mouth, likely to unleash another torrent of fury, but then something stopped him. A voice, sharp and young, cutting through the dark. Leave him alone! I turned, surprised, and saw Aiden, Clarissa's 14-year-old son from her first marriage, stepping out from their driveway. I hadn't seen much of him since they moved in. Just a quiet kid who usually kept to himself, glued to his phone or kicking a ball in their backyard. He marched up, his skinny frame tense, his face flushed. Rick spun on him, furious. Get back inside, kid, he snapped. But Aiden didn't budge. No, he said, his voice shaking but firm. You told her to do it. Mom said it was your idea. The fire, all of it. I'm done with this. I stood there, stunned, as Rick's face went slack, as if the air had been punched from him. What the hell are you talking about? He growled, but Aiden didn't back down. She told me last night. You pushed her to mess with him, to get back at him. I heard you. Rick took a step toward him, hand raised as if he might grab him, but Aiden flinched away, turning to me instead. I'm sorry, Mr. Shaw, he said, his voice cracking. I thought it was just a joke at first, the truck stuff, but it wasn't. I didn't know it'd get this bad. I didn't know what to say. My throat felt tight, caught off guard by this kid standing there spilling it all. It's okay, Aiden, I managed. Takes a lot to say that. He nodded, quick and jerky, then turned and walked back to the house, leaving Rick standing there, frozen. Rick didn't move for a long moment, his fists clenching, his shoulders slumping. He looked at me, something broken in his eyes, then muttered, "This ain't over," and trudged back across the street. But it didn't feel like a threat this time. It felt like a man who had run out of fight. I watched him go, the door slamming behind him, and stood there in the quiet, processing it all. Aiden's words echoed in my head. Rick had pushed her, and now their own child had turned on them. Their reputation was shattered, their family fracturing, and I hadn't even had to lift a finger this time. I went back inside, locked up, and sat down with my coffee, the night settling around me. It wasn't joy I felt, not exactly. It was something closer to relief, mixed with a strange ache I couldn't name. They were breaking, and I had helped make it happen. That was enough for now. I awoke to a morning that felt lighter than any I could recall since Clarissa and Rick had moved in. The sun was out, casting long, peaceful shadows across the street, and their house sat quiet. No truck rumbling, no agitated pacing on the porch, just stillness. I stepped outside with my coffee, the air crisp with that early fall bite, and looked at my yard. The salted patch remained, an ugly scar where my garden used to bloom, but it didn't sting as much today. I had heard through the neighborhood grapevine, Mrs. Henley's whispers mostly, that Clarissa and Rick were packing up. The for sale sign went up a week after Aiden's explosive revelation, and by the end of summer, they were gone. No grand farewell, no dramatic last stand, just a moving truck one night and an empty house the next morning. I stood there, sipping my coffee, staring at the blank windows across the street, and felt something settle within me. Not triumph exactly, but a profound sense of peace I hadn't known in months. The days stretched into weeks, then months, and the cul-de-sac began to heal. The neighbors emerged more often. Mrs. Henley puttered in her yard. Brielle flew her drone around. Even the quiet couple down the block started planting flowers of their own. My yard remained barren for a while, the salt preventing anything from growing, but I was not in a hurry. I would sit on my porch every evening, coffee in hand, watching the street settle into a semblance of normalcy once more. I heard little of Clarissa and Rick after they left, just rumors that they had moved to some apartment across town, still fighting, still bitter. I didn't care enough to dig deeper. They were out of my life, and that was all that mattered. But then, one crisp fall morning, a soft but insistent knock echoed at my door. I set my mug down, curious, and opened it to find Aiden standing there, a small potted plant clutched in his hands. He looked different, taller perhaps, or simply less hunched. his dark hair messy under a baseball cap. "Hey, Mr. Shaw," he said, shifting his weight, his voice quiet but steady. "I brought this for your garden." I blinked, caught off guard, and took the pot. A vibrant little marigold, its yellow blooms a bright contrast against the green leaves. "Thanks," I said, setting it on the porch railing. "You didn't have to do that." He shrugged, kicking at the step with his sneaker. "I wanted to. We're better now. Different place. Mom's still mad, but she's not, I don't know, crazy like before. I just didn't want you to think we were all like that." I looked at him, this kid who had stood up to Rick that night, and felt a warmth I hadn't expected. "Takes a lot to say that, Aiden," I said, truly meaning it. "I appreciate it." He nodded, quick and awkward, then mumbled a goodbye and headed off, his hands shoved in his pockets as he disappeared down the street. I stood there a minute longer, holding that small plant, and something clicked. I had spent months fighting, setting traps, chasing proof. Hell, I had turned my yard into a battlefield just to make them stop. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about moving on. I took the marigold inside, grabbed a shovel, and went to work. The salted spot was still dead, but I dug around it, clearing a new patch near the porch where the soil was clean. I planted Aiden's gift there, patting the dirt down, feeling the earth under my hands again. It wasn't much, just one plant, but it was a beginning. Over the next few weeks, I added more. Daisies, tulips, even a couple of rose bushes I picked up cheap at the hardware store. The neighbors noticed. Mrs. Henley brought me some cuttings from her yard, and Brielle started swinging by with her dog, a scruffy mutt named Rusty, to check my progress. "Looks good, Mr. Shaw," she'd say, her drone buzzing overhead, and I'd nod, wiping sweat from my brow. The garden came back, slowly, piece by piece, and with it the street felt alive again. I would sit out there every evening, coffee steaming in the cool air, watching the flowers catch the last light of day. The tire tracks faded, the broken fence was rebuilt, stronger this time, and that salted patch began to soften, grass creeping in where nothing used to grow. It wasn't the same as before, it couldn't be, not after everything, but it was mine again, and that was enough. Brielle became a regular visitor, her dog flopping in my yard while she told me about school or her latest drone tricks. "Caught a raccoon on video last night," she'd say, grinning, and I'd laugh, feeling lighter than I had in years. Mrs. Henley started calling me over for tea sometimes, and I'd go, listening to her ramble about her grandkids, the quiet settling into something comfortable. One night, as the leaves turned gold and red, I sat on my porch, mug warm in my hands, looking out at the garden. It wasn't perfect. Some plants were scraggly, others still small, but it was growing, steady and sure. I thought about Clarissa and Rick, about the chaos they had wrought, the nights I had spent angry and sleepless. I had fought hard to make it stop, and I had won, not with fists or yelling, but with patience, with proof, with people like Brielle and Aiden stepping up when I least expected it. I didn't hate them anymore, didn't need to. They were gone, and I was still here, my little house quiet, my lawn untouched. I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness familiar and good, and let out a long breath. The fight was over, and the flowers were back. Sometimes I realized it's not about revenge. It's just about taking back what's yours and letting the rest go.